Now we're going to apply central place theory to just some random places, trying to understand some threshold, the idea of threshold and range. But we're going to see some varieties as far as the sizes of threshold and ranges for different things, different goods, different services. And so I ask you, just generally, what would you think the threshold and range for a World War II museum in central Indiana? So the threshold, first off, where would you locate that? So the threshold, you probably locate it somewhere in Indianapolis. This is where the most of the population is. Think about a World War II museum. People might not even ever visit in their lifetime. So it's something you're rarely ever going to see. Something that's very specialized. It caters just to a specific market. If you're someone who's, history teacher, you might visit it once or twice a year. If you're maybe fought in World War II, or maybe you're the son or a daughter of someone who fought in World War II, then maybe you'd be willing to go to it once every 3 or 4 years. But this is not something that people are going to be regularly wanting or consuming. So its threshold and range, probably quite big. And so its threshold, it's going to only be found there in Indianapolis. You're not going to find a World War II museum thriving and succeeding in the middle of nowhere. For example, in Kokomo. Why? There's not a large enough population there that would even want to see a World War II museum and make it even profitable. And so its threshold would be, of all the ones we're going to look at, definitely the biggest. So it's going to require a large area. And so you're only going to find these particular types of museums only in big cities. It makes sense. You're not going to find them in the middle of nowhere. Subsequently, they're also going to have a bigger range. Trust me, if you fought in World War II and you live, 2 hours from the nearest World War II museum, my gosh, you're probably going to go. So it's going to then also pull in a larger area as far as its range, the distance people would be willing to go see a World War II museum. They're obviously jacked up about this stuff to go visit. Now let's look at a different type of good and service, and that's Cheeseburger in Paradise. It's a Jimmy Buffett themed restaurant. Jimmy Buffett's a musician who plays a lot of beach songs. It talks about the Caribbean and Florida and sitting on a beach, drinking some type of tropical drink. And so for the Floridians and people in the South, they're really not that big fans. But in the Midwest, huge fans of Jimmy Buffett. And so they thought, where in the world could we build our first ever Cheeseburger in Paradise restaurant? Well, let's put it in the middle of Jimmy Buffett's fan base here in Indianapolis. And so they opened up the very first restaurant, their very first franchise, Southport Road on the south side of Indianapolis. Then over time, they then realized that, well, they got a lot of people who were going to that south side Indianapolis Cheeseburger in Paradise, and they noticed this from credit cards. As far as people, swiping their card and taking surveys and such. They found a lot of people coming from the north side, or there were people who were visiting the restaurant on their way to the music concert, a Jimmy Buffett music concert, whenever he would play 1 or 2 shows each summer up there in Noblesville. And so what they then did is they then saw they have the minimum demand, so they have the threshold, but they also have the range, the people willing to travel long distances. So you would get people traveling from Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, Chicago, Illinois, just to go to one of these Jimmy Buffett-themed Cheeseburger in Paradise restaurants. Cheeseburger in Paradise is kind of like an Applebee's or an O'Charlie's as far as its level. Decent food. It's not going to be the greatest meal you've ever had. But it's definitely better than, KFC or Hardee's or anything like that. So Cheeseburger in Paradise, their first 2 stores, they did their research and they opened them up here in the north side and also the south side of Indianapolis. So they did their research. They did their central place theory. But then over time, they realized that they were getting a lot of, actually, at the southern store, the south store on the south side, getting a lot of people coming from the south side, getting a lot of people from Martinsville and Mooresville. And so they opened up one in Bloomington. However, it wasn't as popular. So the Bloomington store has since closed. So it just didn't have a large enough threshold. College students, young people, go to a Jimmy Buffett concert. It's Cougar Central. It's nothing but 60-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 40-year-olds. There's not a lot of young people, really. And so, Cheeseburger in Paradise, a good idea, but in young Bloomington, maybe not so much. And so the threshold and range here didn't work out. So they essentially closed the store. But still 2 stores remain there on the south side and the north side. And all this compared to the World War II Museum are stuff that people are going to frequent more often. So you're going to see more people going to a cheeseburger restaurant throughout the year, even if the food sucks. I'm not saying it does. I'm just saying if even if you don't like it, you're going to see people more likely to go to that than something that's more rare, more specialized like a World War II museum. But then McDonald's is something that some people go to every single day. And so when we compare the thresholds and ranges, we saw for the World War II Museum, big threshold, big range. We look at Cheeseburger in Paradise, or an Applebee's, or an O'Charlie's. A definitely smaller range. We look at McDonald's, or a gas station, or a grocery store. They're going to have a much smaller threshold and range, and that makes sense. McDonald's is something that people frequent much more often. People go there every morning. People go there every day for lunch or dinner. People get Happy Meals for their kids every day and wonder why their kid's obese. And so we think about McDonald's, we can see thresholds and ranges being much smaller, and they're scattered all throughout the particular metro area. So we look at something like McDonald's, something that's acquired or something that people have much more often, there's much more daily basis. You're going to see more of them, but they're also going to be having smaller thresholds and ranges. However, when we start to look at places more rural, when we get more out to the country, what you'll notice is the thresholds and ranges get bigger. And so the simple reason why is these are areas in which, if the nearest McDonald's to you is 5 miles away, then you're going to go to it. If the nearest McDonald's from you is 20 miles away, which out in country areas is more likely, you're still going to go to it. It's the nearest McDonald's. It might be the nearest fast food restaurant to you. And so further, where are we going to find, if we think about threshold, we have to have a certain number of people in an area for McDonald's to thrive. Its thresholds are going to be bigger because to actually have, let's say, 20,000 people, we're going to have a bigger circle, bigger threshold to essentially go over and essentially go around more of an area to then capture more people. And so in urban areas, that threshold's much smaller, but in rural areas, it gets much bigger. And so McDonald's is something that's going to be frequented much more often than a World War II museum, for sure.